Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Nun Aleph. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start with a story at the bottom of Nun Amud Bet. We had an ox that fell into a channel, a water channel, that was six handbreadths deep. That's one amah, which is 6 handbreadths deep. And we already said in our Mishna, 10 handbreadths is what kills. So something strange happened, which is that Rav Nachman said after the animal fell in, they shechted the animal, and Rav Nachman said you can't eat the animal because it's a treifa. Now the question is, right, why is the animal a treifa? And Rava basically, right, the answer is because he must hold that an animal can possibly die even if it falls less than 10 tefachim from the hit, right? We said here that, right, it had a problem with the limbs. And he basically said, this could have caused the animal to die. You should have waited to see. You didn't wait and see. Well, now you can't eat the animal. So Rava basically is going to ask 3 questions on Rav Nachman. The first one, starting from the bottom of Nun Amud Bet at the bottom, Eitivei Rava le Rav Nachman. He now says, based on our Mishna, this makes no sense what you said. You're basically assuming that a hit of 10 tefachim can kill somebody. Well, hayu pchutim 10 tefachim v'nafal l'tocho shor chamor mit patur. My time, Allah mishum delay bechavata, comes Rav and he says, why does our Mishnah say less than 10 tefachim is not going to kill someone? Is it not because a 10 tefachim fall is not going to be anything that's going to cause someone's death, right? The impact of that fall. And that's basically following, right? Rav is following Shmuel, who says it's the impact that you're liable for damages of bore. To which, starting at the top of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, comes Rav Nachman and answers, no, mishum delay behavla. No, what are you talking about? Yes, the impact can kill an animal, and that's why even less than 10 tefachim. That's why I told you that this shiur is basically a treifa and you can't eat it. That's because it could kill. But we don't care that the impact is going to kill this animal because the impact isn't what you're liable for bore. That's the ground caused it, not the bore, not the cistern, to which we say it's because it doesn't have hevel. Less than 10 tefachim doesn't have that air, right, or maybe lack of air, right? But it's the hevel, which is basically going to kill is why you're liable for bore. It's the hevel that kills, and less than that, it's not going to kill the hevel. So again, the floor might kill it, the ground of the cistern, but that's not what you're liable damages for. To which he says, okay, Rava says, well, then yachi hu zakbo chayav. Well, if the hevel is what makes you liable, and it doesn't have 10 tefachim's worth of hevel, then why are you liable damages for it? Because remember, under 10 tefachim, you're still liable damages. So Amar lei ein hevel l'mitav, yesh hevel l'nizakim. This is a very obvious answer, which is there's hevel which can kill at 10 tefachim. Less than 10 tefachim, the hevel can't kill, but the hevel could damage. Okay, in other words, it's the air, contaminated air in this bore is enough to damage someone. It just can't kill them at less than 10 tefachim. So if we summarize this, we basically have, okay, after the first question on Rav Nachman and the answer, we basically have a distinction between can the animal be killed from an impact of a fall less than 10 tefachim? Yes, the animal can be killed, but it's going to be killed from the impact from the hit, which is not going to make you liable for damages of bore, because bore, again, if you go with Rav, which is what Rav Nachman goes by, it's the hevel, which is what's going to cause the death or cause you the responsibility to pay for the death. Okay, if it's the impact, then it's the floor, it's the ground, it's not the fact that you dug the cistern, as difficult as that is to fathom, as we discussed. That's his approach. So now Eitivei, second question, and this is coming from a Mishna in Sanhedrin, which talks about how they would stone someone. Now, in order to stone someone, they didn't just throw rocks on him and kill him. No, they actually first brought the person up to the top of a 2-story building, and then they would throw him down from the top of that. So Eitivei, Beit HaSkila haya gavoa shtei komot. The Beit HaSkila was 2 heights high, okay? It was a 2-story building, but we're going to see the stories were a story is basically 3 amot. It's about the height of a person, 10 tefachim high. I'm sorry, 12 tefachim, no, sorry, my mistake. 3 cubits, which is 18 tefachim high, okay? So that's basically, right, remember, I got confused with the 10. We're going to come back to the 10, right? The 10 is basic height of that's going to be the next source we're going to bring. 10 is a minimum height, let's say for a sukkah, for a wall, right? That's the minimum height. But here we're talking about 3 amot is each floor. So 3 amot, 6 and an amma 18. So 3, now we're going to get to 3 in a minute. Right now we're only at 2. So the Beit Haskila was 2 komot high, which is 36 tfachim. V'tanei alan is a bright on that Mishna that says v'koma shelo harei kan shalosh. And now if you have the person, because what happens? The person's standing there. We don't count by their feet. We count by their head. In the end, it's their head that's going to get smashed on the floor when they die. So, right, very pleasant to talk about these deaths. Wait till we get to Sanhedrin and we get into all the details of how all these people get killed. A little bit grotesque, but they take him up to the 2 flights up, and then they throw him down. Harei kan shalosh. So in the end, you have 3 heights of, right, a height of 3 people, basically. 2 stories, which are the height of an average person, 3 amot, plus this person is now 3 amot high. So you're going to have 54 tfachim. So now he says the following. If you think someone could die from an impact of less than 10 tfachim high, then why do you need 54? Why don't you just put him at the top of 10 tfachim or less than 10 tfachim and throw him down? To which Rav Nachman says, I don't understand why you're using this against me. This goes against you too. According to you, you should do a 10. Why did you do 54 instead of 10 or instead of less than 10? Either which way, it's a question. To which they explain, Ela ke Rav Nachman. Let's explain this source according to Rav Nachman himself. He's the one we're asking the question about. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Rava. He said somewhere else, what's the reason why we have it 54 height? And then there's absolutely nothing to do with our topic. Because it says, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you should love your friend as you love yourself. Bor lo mitayafa. So we have to choose a death, the best death possible, meaning the quickest way to die is to throw him from this height of 54 handbreadths, because that will make him die fast, right? If you throw him from 10 tfachim or less than 10 tfachim, he's not going to die so quickly, right? He'll maybe get injured, and then over time he'll die. That'll be painful, right? When we want to kill someone for the court, we have to do it the quickest way possible to make it the least unpleasant. Already unpleasant, right? But let's not make it bad unpleasant. To which the Gemara has a better or another question, which again, in light of events of October 7th, a little hard to read this, but ihachi nag batfei. Then why do you put him even up higher where it'll really cause him to die even quicker? Mishum deminafa. That's because if you go too high, this is the part that's a little hard to discuss, but the body's going to fall into many parts, and basically it'll be we don't want to do that to a human body, right? We don't want to destroy it. We just want the person to die quickly, but without really making the body into parts. ATV, third question. So this source in the end had nothing to do with our topic. Ki yipol hanofel mimenu. Now this is the pasuk about putting up a ma'akeh. Okay, we need a fence around your roof so that somebody doesn't go up to your roof and fall. That's ki yipol hanofel mimenu. Somebody might fall from the roof. So what do we learn from this? Mimenu v'lo b'tocho. It has to fall from the roof and not into the roof. What could we be talking about? We don't need, what it basically means is you need a ma'akeh, a railing, that's the better word. You need a railing in order to prevent a person from falling off the roof, but not to prevent a person from falling into the roof. And how could they fall into a roof? You'll see in a minute. Ketzad. Let's say the public domain was actually higher than your roof. Right? Let's say your city's on a hill, and basically you end up with the public domain being higher than your roof by 10 tfachim. And someone could theoretically, okay, we're going to go with Rashi's interpretation. What this means is someone theoretically could fall from the public domain 10 tfachim down into your roof and die. But patur, you're exempt from, again, this is Rashi's interpretation, you're exempt from what? Exempt from putting up a railing, because we're not worried about that. That's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk says we're worried about someone falling off your roof, not falling into your roof. So, but if it's deeper, if the Reshut HaRabim is lower than your roof by 10 tefachim, which is the normal case, then if you fall from the roof into the public domain, and you could theoretically die, therefore chayav, you're liable. Now, notice what it says here, 10 tefachim. Why 10 tefachim? Well, if Rav Nachman, you're right, one could die even less than 10 tefachim, then why is 10 tefachim the amount here? It should be less than 10. You already have to put up a railing so that nobody falls off and dies. To which he answers him, Shane Bayit. The reason you need 10 is because Ma'akeh, the din, is a law for the house. It says in the pasuk, Ki tivneh bayit chadash. If you build a new house, you have to put up a ma'akeh. If you don't have a house, if it's not even 10 tefachim high, that's not even a house, right? Just like by sukkah, it's not a sukkah if it's not 10 tefachim high. That's not a sukkah. That's not a place of living. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Now, when we said 10 tefachim high, we meant from the ground to the top of the roof. But if you say the height of how much it could fall is 10 tefachim, because that's obviously what they mean here, and it's because the 10 tefachim we just said is because of the house, that's what Rav Nachman says, something doesn't make sense here, because if the outside space is 10, meaning you're on the top of the roof and you could fall 10, what's your inside space in the house? The house now has under the roof is the floor, which is the ceiling of your house. Now, if the ceiling of your house from the roof, right, the floor of the roof, down to the ground is 10, your house is actually less than 10 because you have the thickness of the ceiling and the tiach, the cement that, or whatever it is that's keeping it in place. So all of that is going to mean your house is actually less than 10 tefachim, which means you're not going to have a house. So if you say it's a din in the house, this house doesn't actually have 10 tefachim. And he wants to say that further proves my point. 10 has to do with the impact and the falling of 10. To which Amar Lei Kigon Dechat Mikavai. So comes Rav Nachman and he says, it must be, if it's exactly 10, it must be that you dug under in the house, right? So the ground outside from there to the roof is 10. But inside the house, from under the ceiling, let's say the ceiling takes up 1 handbreadth. So you dug down another handbreadth, and there has to be at least 10 tefachim in the house of height as well. To which the Gemara says, so Rava says back to me, Hachi, Kilo havinami abara asara mishkach ladahavi mikavai asara, kigon dechak betvei. He says, but then if you're saying it's the 10 tefachim is all about the house and the inside, so you could theoretically have a case where if you're already talking about digging down, so maybe you dig down, let's say the house is 6 tefachim high, and from the ground outside to the roof is 6 tefachim. In the house, you dug down another 4, and you got to 10. You want to say 10 is all about the inside space of the house? Then you could end up with not that much space outside, and you'll still have to build a ma'akeh according to your railing. And basically what he's saying is, that's of course not the halacha. The halacha it has to do, it's obvious to everyone, he's basically saying that the 10 is the height of the fall. And therefore, he basically knocks out Rav Nachman. So because Rav Nachman gets knocked out, we now explain it's not what we thought. It's not that Rav Nachman thought, if you remember, at the bottom of the previous daf, we said, it must be, Alma Kasava Rav Nachman, Yesh Chavataba Asara, must be that someone could get killed less than Asara, to which they use the laws of the railing to prove no way, no how. People don't die less than 10, otherwise you'd have to put a ma'akeh for less than 10. So, Ela Hainu Tamad Rav Nachman, it must be a different reason. Savar Mikresa de Torah la'ara Kamma have arba'a. Basically, what he's going to say is this: when an animal falls into a pit that's 6, right, into this this channel of water, there was 6 handbreadths high, but the animal itself is standing on the ground with his feet. Remember, like the person, and we said the person's falling a whole Kamma because we're really talking about the person's head. Well, the animal, it's the stomach's going to end up on the ground. Now, from the stomach to the ground is 4 tefachim, they say. Okay, so arita de delai Kamma have. Right, so sorry, let's just start again. Mikresa de Torah, from the stomach of the animal, la'ara, to the ground, Kamma have is 4. It's about 4 tefachim. Arita de delai, the water channel, Kamma have, how deep is that? Shita, 6, ha'asara. So you have the 6 there plus the 4 of there. When the animal falls, we're not counting from the feet to the feet because the animal doesn't fall on its feet. The animal falls on its side, on its stomach. So we're counting the space from the stomach to get all the way down to the bottom is already 10. And that's why he was worried the animal was a treifa, because it actually did fall 10. And that's how we resolved the issue. So now they say, ishtakach de kikam chabet me'asarau de kama chabet. And therefore you see that it really fell. The impact was actually 10. Ella, but then they say they have one more question. Matnitin de katane ma bor sheyesh shu kedei lahamid asarat tvachim af kol sheyesh bo kedei lahamid asarat tvachim b'shita namisagya. Well, then any bore should be 6 should be enough, because when we're talking about a bore, we're talking about an animal falling in the bore. Any animal is going to be standing up, is going to have that 4 tefachim difference. Then why did the Mishna say a bore that's 10 deep? Should have said 6 deep, because 6 plus the 4 gets you to 10. Amre matnitin de igander labor. The Mishna is talking about a case where it rolled into the bore, where the animal was lying down and rolled into the bore. And for that, you need 10 tefachim. Some of the Mepharshim say that it's possible that we could distinguish between a treifa and damages. That for damages, you need it to be 10 deep. But for worrying that maybe the animal actually died, 6 would be enough, because you can add the 4 of the stomach and maybe that, the height of this from the feet to the stomach, and maybe we would make a distinction between loss of treifa and loss of damages. Anyway, that's an aside. Okay, that was so what we basically did was we had one understanding of Rav Nachman. We brought 3 questions of Rava against this understanding, and then we resolved the first 2 questions. The third question we couldn't resolve. So in the end, we basically reject the understanding of Rav Nachman and explain him based on something else, that it really had to do with the 4 from the feet to the stomach and the 6 of there, and we really got to 10 in the end. Mishna, bor shel shnei shutafim. We now have a bor that's owned by 2 people. Avar alav harishon velo kisau, v'hasheni velo kisau, hasheni chayav. So you have a bor owned by 2 people. The first question of the Gemara is, how could you possibly have a bor owned by 2 people? Isn't a bor ownerless? So we're going to talk about that. The first one passes by and then doesn't cover it. And also, okay, I'll get into what the question is really. I kind of said something without giving all the details, but we'll get into the shnei shutafim in a minute. The first one passes by, doesn't cover it. So are they responsible for damages? Well, if the second person passes by, the second owner, and doesn't cover it, then and when somebody falls in, an animal, let's say, falls in, the second one is going to be liable and not the first. So Amre, the Gemara says, how can you have a case? It really depends on the machlok of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishma. Depends what a bor is. If you say like Rabbi Akiva, that if you have a bor in your domain, and remember, according to Rabbi Akiva, you made your property ownerless, but the bor is still yours and owned by you, then you could have a bor owned by 2 people. It could be 2 people share the property. They both made the property ownerless, and the bor is now owned by the person. The chatzir belonged to both, the courtyard, and therefore the bor belonged to both of them. And they basically said, our property is ownerless, but they kept ownership over the bor. That's fine. Then you could have a bor of 2 shutafim, 2 partners. But if you say a bor in your domain is exempt, then how could you have a case where 2 people own 1 bor? So, Bereshita Rabim, right? We're going to say the only way you're going to be chayav in bor, according to Rabbi Yishmael, is in the public domain. And Bereshita Rabim, bor shel shnei shutafim yechem mishkachala. How could you possibly have a case of a bor that was dug by 2 people? Now, what's the issue? Well, idashavu shaliach travayu. Let's see what the possibilities are. If 2 people said to a shaliach, a messenger, go dig a bor for us, and then theoretically that person digs a bor. Now, again, they're not owning it. He's not owning it. Nobody's owning it. So, but theoretically, they paid this person to go dig it up, or they appointed him, whatever it might be, whether he got paid or not. And they said, go dig the bor, and he does, and he digs this cistern for them in the middle of the public domain. Well, that won't make them liable because ein shaliach lidvar ve'ra. This is a very interesting line. What does this mean? This is a very basic law, which means you can't send someone to sin for you. You don't get the sin, they get the sin, right? This is like if somebody tells you to do something insane, like jump off from the top of the highest building, and you jump, well, that's your fault. You're an idiot, right? You're not going to say, oh, it's your fault, pay me damages. What do you mean? Why'd you get up and do it? Because I told you so? Come on. That's ridiculous. So that's what the concept of ein shaliach lidvar ve'ra is. Now, what's the problem? Whoever said it's an avera to dig a bor. Torah says, if you dig a bor, you're responsible for damages. It never says you're not allowed to dig a bor in the middle of the public domain. So some commentaries say this is a rabbinic decree, that the rabbis said because it's dangerous and you're going to be liable damages, you're not allowed to do it. And therefore, what do we see here? The ein shaliach lidvar ve'ra applies in a Rabbanan also, in rabbinic law. So that would be an important distinction to make, that, it's something you could learn from the sugya. Some people think it actually is a Torah law. What would be the Torah law then? Don't put a stumbling block in front of someone blind, right? Which applies to all sorts of things, not just to blind people, but creating a bor in the middle of the public domain is really a stumbling block for people. Another option is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Should love your fellow friend, right? Treat them the way you want to treat people. You wouldn't want to create something that you would trip in the middle of the street, so don't do it for other people. So maybe it's Torah, right? By Torah law, maybe it's rabbinic. In any case, you can't have shutafim that way, because if you sent this messenger to do it, it wouldn't make you liable. They would be responsible. Now, if one person dug the first 5 and the other dug the second 5, well, because the second person turned it into a bor that could now kill, because remember, under 10, it won't kill. So the first one did only 5. It could damage, but not kill. The second one dug it to 10. They already changed the nature of the bor. to one that could kill, therefore they are now fully responsible and not the second person, not the first person. So in that case, it wouldn't be belonging to shutafim. It would really only belong to the second person because he changed the bore from what it was from the first person. Again, this is in a case where nobody owns it. So the person who digs more, it's now his bore. Well, Hanikala Rebbe ulinizakim mishkachala. Now, we had a machlok at Rebbe and Rabbanan. We learned in the beginning of the Masechet. We'll review it again. But basically, Rebbe's going to say that when it comes to damages, if we share, one person dug 9 and the other person dug the last 10, we're going to share responsibility for damages because the first person already dug a bore that could have been caused damages. So that would fit. But Rebbe ulamita, but if it caused death, for sure the first person isn't responsible because they didn't dig a bore that could have killed somebody. And Rabbanan say ben lamita ben lenizakim, think, and we're going to see this inside in a minute, think that always the second person is responsible because they changed it from a bore that could injure to a bore that could kill. At this point, they have it's only theirs and not the others. So according to him, again, you wouldn't have a case, not according to Rebbe if you were talking about death, and not according to the rabbis about death or damages, where you could have a bore of shutafim. So the only way to find a bore of shutafim is according to Rebbe, and assuming you're talking about damages. How could that be? So Rabbi Yochanan answers before we get to what Rebbe and Rabbanan say, which we'll get to, that'll be an aside, but right now we're going to give an answer. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, how could you have a bore that belongs to 2 people? It's when the bore was already 9, and then one of them dug it, let's say. The last 10th tefach was dug by both of them at the same time. They both took out the dirt together, and then they're both owning it because they both turned together into a bore of 10. And that's our answer to the question of how we could have a bore of shutafim. It was our first question on the Mishnah was, what's the shnei to shutafim? Without getting into the halach and the Mishnah at all, about one person didn't cover it, and then the other person didn't cover it, right? The second person's responsible. That we're going to get back to much later. So first I want to know my Rebbe, my Rabbanan, what is the opinion of each of them? So we have here Tanya, a bride that brings their opinions. One digs a bore that was 9, the other one fills it into 10. According to the rabbis, the second one's responsible both for damages and for death. Rebbe Omer, it's death, the second one, because the first one didn't dig a bore that was deep enough to kill. But if it comes to damages, they both have to share the damages. So my time at the Rabbanan, where does Rabbanan get it from? This is what we saw yesterday, that kiyiftach ish bor, and then it says kiyachre ish bor, if you open a bore or if you dig a bore. Why do you need to say it twice? If you just open a bore that was already dug and you're liable, of course, if you dig a bore, you're going to be liable. What this comes to say is someone who digs after someone else digs it deeper, right, from 9 to 10, basically undoes the first action, and the action becomes called in their name. That's what we learn. To which Rebbe Amar Lacha, what will Rebbe say? Why does he not learn it from that pasuk? For very obvious reasons. What we learned yesterday. Hanu mitzvah tzricha kedamrinan. He needs it for the other drasha that we saw, the machloka Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael. That's what he needs the pasuk for. V'Rabbanan not mitzvah tzricha. So wait, how can the rabbis not say that that's what the pasuk is going for? We already have other drashot on this pasuk. So Elahainu Tamad Rabbanan. So we now say it's not the real reason. They got it from that pasuk, but from a different thing in that pasuk. Kichre ish bor. Okay, Amar Kra. Kichre ish bor echavalo shnaim. It says a person digs a pit, a cistern. What do we say? A person means 1 and not 2. So it's only going to be if there's one person, meaning there's only one person who's going to be liable. Now, soon we'll ask why the second and not the first. We'll get back to that. The Rebbe, he says, what do you mean? You can't learn from ish that. Ishbor comes to teach you a person digs a pit, a cistern, that's when you're liable. But if an animal does it, you're not liable. That's a halacha we've seen before. So you can't learn what you're trying to learn. So Rabbanan, what are they going to say? Trei ishbor k'tive. Wait, it says kiftach ishbor and kichre ishbor. One is going to teach you ishbor and not shor, not an ox who digs the pit. You won't be liable for those damages. And the other one comes to teach you one person and not 2. And that's how the rabbis get their position. And that's why Rebbe disagrees. Now, Rebbe, why don't they say it says it twice? Let's learn both. I did katapai. No, the second one is not important. It's just, it was making a parallel in a literary sense to the first one. That's why it said ish, don't make anything out of it. Now they say, okay, so now that we have one of them is going to be chayav according to the rabbis, maybe the first one should be liable, especially if you're talking about damages. They already dug a pit that could have damaged. So what? That the second one added one more tefach. Either way, right? The other one already built one that could damage. So lo salkadat tachtamar krat v'hameti hi yellow, because it says when the pasuk that says Baal Abor has to pay the damages, it says right hameti yellow. If he kills the ox, then right the ox remains the nevela, the dead animal remains with the original owner. Well, how does he darshan hameti yellow? Hahudeka avid mita. So it's relating to the one who caused the death. That's the one who has to pay. Wait a minute, didn't we learn something else from those words? Rava said, if I have a shore, an ox, that I was using for a sacrifice, and then I couldn't bring the sacrifice anymore, something happened and got disqualified. So now what happens? If your ox, if that ox fell into your pit, the pit that you dug, you wouldn't be liable. Why? It's only in a case where I get to keep the nevela. Now, I don't have rights to this psulei mukdashim. There's all sorts of things I can't do with it. I'm limited in my usage of it. So it's not a case where the mate is mine, the nevela is mine, because that animal is forbidden for a bunch of ways because it was supposed to be used as a sacrifice, even though it can't be anymore. So it's only b'mishamet shelo, only to someone who the mate is actually their own and can benefit from, not in a case of psulei mukdashim. So you wouldn't have to pay damages. So we use that pasuk for something else. We can't use it for what we wanted to say, that it's to teach you. It's the second one, the one who dug the pit, that made it liable to kill, that made it ready to kill somebody. And that's why it's the second and not the first. Well, in the end, we're going to say you can really learn both things, because Amre v'lav mimela shma mina debahu david mitaskin. And obviously the pasuk, when it says Baal Abor Shalem, Kesef Shuvid La Baalav Bamei Yellow, obviously it's someone who actually kills an animal. So it's someone who obviously is paying because they killed an animal. And then obviously it would be the one who created the pit, dug it deep enough that it could actually kill, which would be only the second person. So we now have that the second, okay, this is the Rebbe Rabbanit Machloket that we got to as an aside, because we were trying to find a case of Shnei Shutafim. How could you have two people who are responsible for a bor, and that either only fits with Rebbe, or in the end we have Rabbi Yochanan who said it's talking about where they both did it together, okay? But if they did one after the other, then we get into this big machloket Rabbi Rabbanan, which we just saw now. Tanu Rabbanan. What I'm going to do today, it's a pretty long daf, and it's the Shabbos stuff. I'm summarizing at the end of each section. I'm not going to summarize at the end of the daf. Now we have someone who digs already. From the beginning, could have killed. It was 10. Then someone else digs another 10, and now it's 20. Comes a third person and digs. Third person digs it to 30, and now someone gets injured. Kulan chayavim. They're all liable for damages. Ureminu. But wait, this contradicts another source. If somebody digs a pit that's 10, same thing, right? 10. Somebody else comes and basically makes it narrower and starts putting in plaster and cement and all that. Rashi says kiyed is that they took tiach, which is cement, and they made pictures on the inside. Okay, whatever it is, he cemented it somehow. The debate about what exactly this is, but the point is he made it narrower. We're going to see later why this is important. Ha'acharon chayav, the last one is liable, even though it was already 10 tefachim. So we seem to have a contradiction. The first one, it was already 10 tefachim, he made it deeper 20, and we said they're responsible. And the second one, only the last person's responsible by making it narrower. So lema haRebbe haRabbanan. Easiest way to resolve this is to say one holds like Rebbe, one holds like the rabbis. Remember, Rebbe says they share the responsibility for damages. The rabbis said, no, the last person's always responsible. So the source that said 10, 20, 30 they share is Rebbe. The source that says the last one is the rabbis. But I'm a Rav Zvid now, and we're going to have two versions of Rav Zvid. One, he's going to read the whole thing according to the rabbis. The other one is going to read both sources according to Rebbe. Two different versions of what Rav Zvid actually said. The ha-Rabbanan, both actually fit with the rabbis. How so? Because the rabbis generally say the last one pays. Well, the reason why was when there was 9 to 10, the one who dug 9 is not going to be liable because the pit couldn't even kill anybody. But But in the case of the 10, 20, 30, the first one had already dug a bore that could kill. So therefore, afilu Rabbanan modu de kulam chayavim. In that case, the rabbis are going to say, of course, the first one's liable as well, and they share the responsibility. To which the Gemara says, but that doesn't fit, because how do you explain the siyed and kiyed case? The first one already dug it 10 deep, and it could kill. And there it says only the last one. So that's not a good resolution to the contradiction. To which they say, oh no, yes it is, because in the case where you narrowed it because you added the plaster and now it's narrower, it must have been too wide. Now, we talked until now about the depth, but now we have to talk about the width. If the whole thing is the hevel and the air and the lack of air, the wider it is, the more air there is, and the better the air is, right? The quality of the air, and it's not necessarily going to kill someone. So it must be that when it was wider, it wasn't able to kill, even though it was 10 deep from the hevel. But when the second person came and made it narrower, now already you can die from the hevel. So, Ika de Amre, that's the first answer. Okay, it's all then according to the rabbis. But Ika de Amre, Amar Rav Zvid, Hava ha Rebbe. According to the second interpretation, Rav Zvid says that they're both Rebbe. Had de Katani Kulan Chayavim Shapir. So the one who said they're both liable, right? All three of them are liable. That fits perfectly with Rebbe. When it comes to damages, we're going to share the damages, okay? Or even in this case, when it comes to death, because all three of them created a bore that could have killed. But had de Katani Acharon Chayav. So now in the case of the Siyed and the Siyed and Kiyed, where he narrowed it, why are you going to say only the last one? Well, he's going to say, you would have to say in this case that it was so wide that it didn't even have hevel that would even damage anyone. It wouldn't damage and it wouldn't kill. And the second person who came narrowed it to the extent that now there's hevel for damages and there's hevel for death, and that's why they're both going to be equally responsible. Amar Rava. Now we're going to have some halachot of Rava. First, he's going to give us a halacha, then he's going to ask a question. Hiniach even al pi abor v'shlima la'asara. Okay, instead of digging deeper, the first person, right? The second person, sorry. Now we have a board that's 9. Somebody then comes along, a second person, puts a stone, making the edge near the bore higher, which means that the fall is going to be 10 deep, even though the bore is only 9, but the fall from the stone is 10 deep. So if you do this, and it's hishlima la'asara, you now made it 10 deep in terms of the fall, banu lemachloket Rebbe Rabbanan. This is the exact same machloket between Rebbe and the rabbis. Is the second one responsible because they turned it into a bore that could kill, right? And only the second one, that's what Rebbe would say. And then basically took ownership over it entirely by changing its nature, even when it comes to damages. Or is it like Rebbe who said, no, if it's death, yes, you're right, the last one, because the first one didn't have a pit that could have killed. But if it's damages, they're going to share the responsibility. So which the Gemara says, Pshita, this is obvious. Why would you even bother mentioning that it's the same machloket? We know that. To which they say, well, you might have thought they're different. Ma'u detema, you might have thought, lematahu dehevle dide kakatile. When you dig it 1 tefach deeper, you're basically adding hevel to the pit. So therefore, because the hevel is kind of inside the pit, in this case, what you do, you added a rock outside. Avalamala de lo hevle dide kakatil. That's not the hevel that caused the death, right? If you're saying that it's hevel and not the impact, then that one extra stone made your fall greater, but it didn't increase the hevel in the bore. So maybe you'd say they're both equally responsible. To which they say, Kamash malan. That's why you needed to tell us, no, it's the same exact machloket, even though maybe you're not really increasing hevel inside the bore, but still, since the fall is down 10 tefachim, we are going to make you liable. By Rava, tam tefach v'silek avanav mahu. Tam it with a tet, which really means that if, again, we have person number 1 comes, digs a bore that's 9 tefachim deep. Comes another person, digs another tefach deep, 10, and then fills it back in. So they basically did an action that caused the bore to become their own, but then they undid it. So do we look at this as if you erased it and as if there was no marking, right? Like when you erase something on a piece of paper. It's as if it was never there. Or do we see that you erased something and maybe that makes it significant? Like maybe it really was yours. You took ownership. Now you fixed it, but it could still damage. So maybe you're liable for damages. or silek avanav, or if you put a stone at the top to make it now 10 deep, but then you remove the stone, it went back to the 9 tefachim deep one that someone else had dug, maybe you're not responsible. Mi amrina, do we say, my David Shakle, what he did, he undid, and therefore it's as if it's erased. O Dilma, and therefore person number one is going to be responsible. O Dilma nistaklumas erishon, but kamale kule birishute. Or do we say that person, let's say it was me, whatever I did, I already undid, right? When I dug down deeper, or I put the stone up at the top, I turned it into my bore because now this bore could kill and I'm responsible for it. And therefore, even when I fixed it, I'm now still going to be liable for damages it causes. Again, not for death because it's not a bore that could kill, but I am liable for damages and then it's mine. We don't know the answer to this question. I'm a Rabba Bar Chana, I'm a Shmuel Bar Marta. So Rabba Bar Chana now says, in the name of Shmuel Bar Marta, bor shmona umehem shnei tfachim mayim chayav. If you have a bore that's 8 tfachim deep, but the bottom 2 tfachim of the 8, so 7 and 8, are full of water. He says you're liable if someone dies. Why? My timer. Kol tefach demaya ketrei diabashadam. When it comes to hevel, water contaminates. So if you have 2 tfachim of water, it's as if there's 4 tfachim of water. So basically you have 6 without water and another 4, which is 2 times 2, 4 of water. So it's like you have 10. But now comes the question. These are usually the questions that Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, kind of the nitpicky questions that we usually don't have answers to. Here it's just asked randomly by, the students. We don't know who asked. Ibayalahu, they asked, bor tish'al mehem tefach echad mayim. What if the bore was 9 deep and there was only 1 tefach of water at the bottom? From 8 to 9 was 1 tefach of water. So it's not 10 tefachim deep, but is the 1 considered like 2? Now, why would this be any different? Well, miamrinan kevan delon fishe maya lepu havla. There's not that much water. Because there's not that much water, maybe it's not hevel. It doesn't double. We don't view this as double the amount of hevel. O dilma kevan da amik tfei eat behavla. Or do we say, since this is deeper, it's already 9 deep, maybe there's more hevel. So even though maybe 1 tefach isn't enough, but maybe it is when it's already at a depth of 9 tefachim, as opposed to the 8 before. Another similar question. Let's go the other direction. It's 7 deep, but of the 7, 3 tefachim are water. So now, do we say because there's a lot of water, it actually is going to increase the hevel, which is going to cause the death. So the 3 are going to be like 6. Again, 4 without water and 6 with water, you're going to have 10. Odom, again, you don't have 10, but it's as if it's 10 when it comes to the hevel. Or maybe because it's only 7 deep. Only when it's 8 deep do we say the water counts double. When it's only 7 deep, maybe not. And we end with teku. We don't have an answer. Now Rav Shizbi says, what if you widen it? So, mahu. So already it could kill. It was 10 tefachim deep. What if you widen it now? So, Amrle, haremi etavla. So Rava says to him, of course you're not liable, because it already could kill before, and now by widening it, you made it have less hevel, so it was less likely to kill. Amarle, Rav says, what are you talking about? It's the opposite. By widening it, you made it more likely someone was going to fall in, because it was such a wide opening, very easy to fall in. So El Amar Rav Ashi, Nechse Rav Ashi says, let's look at the situation. We can make an assessment based on what we see. Ibahav lamayit hare miet havla. Depends why the person died. If you remember, by the way, Shmuel says it could be hevel or chavata. So if you go with Shmuel, you could say like this. If the person died from the hevel, well, then it's the first person's responsibility because the second person actually made it less hevel. So if they died anyway of hevel, it must be the first person's responsibility. If it was from the impact, then it's because you made it easier for the person to fall in. Now, it's not necessarily true, and that's why we're going to have an Ika Amre, a second version of what Rav Ashi said. Amar Rav Ashi nechse anan, let's look and assess the following. Ima hi gisa nafal, if you widened it on the left, and the person fell in on the left side, then hare kiref hazeka, then it was your fault for the person who widened it because they widened it to the left side, and the person fell on the left side. Obviously, because you widened it, they fell. But if they fell in on the right side and you widened it on the left side, you can't possibly say it was your fault for doing that. And therefore, right, haremi et hevla. And then it must be because of the hevel, right? The person actually made it less likely for you to die of the hevel, and you didn't die because you fell in because it was wider. So it must be we're going to make the first person responsible. So that's Rav Ashi's answer to what to do in this situation. Itmar. Another machloket. Now we're going to talk about how wide does it need to be to say this isn't going to kill anymore. Again, depth of 10, that we know. But what about width? At what width is it going to be already too much width that it's not a bore that can kill anymore? So if the omek is like the rochav, okay, so let's say it's 10 deep and 10 wide, right? It's kind of, again, not square shape, but in terms of the sizes, right? It's the same. Rabba v'Rav Yosef, Damri Travayu, Mishmei de Rabba, Bar Chana, Damri Mishmei de Rav Mary, many. Okay, now we're going to see, this is Rabba and Rav Yosef had a disagreement about, they both say in the name of the same person, who said in the name of another same person. They both pass on this tradition from the same people, but they each say something different. Chadamar that la'olam yesh b'hevel ad she'eruch b'yeter alamka. It's going to have hevel unless it's more wide than deep. So it would have to be more than 10 width in order to say it's not hevel. It's not going to kill. And then again, if the person does die, it's not your fault. Chadamar, the other one says, la'olam ein b'hevel ad she'he omka yeter aruch ba. No, it's not going to have hevel until the omek is more than the width. Meaning, if the width is 10, if it's equal 10, 10, then it's actually not going to be. Right, sorry, let me make sure I have this straight. Right, if the rochba is the same, then it will be hevel according to the first one, and the second one saying it won't have hevel until the depth is more than the width. So you would have to have it, 10 deep and 9.5 narrow, then it will be hevel. But if it's equal, you will say it won't be hevel. The other one, at equal, it will be hevel. It would have to have more for it not to be hevel. Avar alav harishon velo kisau. Now, after all this discussion about bor, okay, we got into all these different things. We started with the shnei shutafim. From there, we got to different people, right, where two people, one person does one person does the other. Who's responsible for what? Right? Then we did, what about if you not only dig it deeper, what if you added a stone to it? Then we did, if there's 8 with water, okay, that was a whole different issue that didn't have to do with two people, but the nature of water and hevel, and we got into other things about the nature of hevel and wide width versus height and all that. Now we get back to the Mishna. The Mishna said, Avar alav harishon velo kisau. So now they say, V'rishona me'emat miftar. From when does the first person become exempt? Okay, when is it not their responsibility anymore? This reminds me a lot of a game. When you are playing a game and you say, I'm done with my turn, and then before the other person starts, you say, oh, wait, I want to change something. And there's always a debate. Is it okay? Is it not okay? You said it's not your turn anymore. But on the other hand, the next person didn't really go yet. So this is a little bit of what the debate is here. At what point does it become the responsibility of person number 2? So Rishon, from what point do they become exempt? Rabba for Rav Yosef, again, the same people, the Amrei Travayo, they both said, Mishmei de Rabba Bar Chana, the Amrei Mishmei de Rabbi many, same people, they're quoting. But again, a debate about what the tradition they have was. Okay, when you say my turn is up, when you said, okay, I'm done, it's your turn, you can now take water from there. The other one says, no, you have to pass them. Now, dalyo, some people think is the deli, the pail. Some people say it's the cover, to cover the bore. Okay, and that's really the responsibility, right? So there's a debate about which one it is. Anyway, you have to do some action. It's not just enough to say my turn is over, but let's say it's like you pass the baton, you pass something over and say, now you have responsibility, now it's yours. But it's obviously not just a baton symbolic, it's the actual thing that they're going to use either to take the water out or to cover the bore. So now it makes sense to say, by the way, the cover, because then you're saying you're in charge now to cover it. Kittanai. So now they say this is a machloket tanaim. Hamadlet mayim min habor. You're taking water out of the bore. And the other person says, leave me, it's my turn. As soon as the other person leaves and says, fine, take your turn, then that first person becomes exempt. Okay, same thing. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov matches the person who says you have to pass on the delete or the cover. What's the root of the machloket here? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov savar yesh breira. Remember that retroactive designation. That means that when we share a bore and I take my water and you take your water, in the end, it's as if from the beginning I own 50% of the water and you own 50% of the water. It's not like I was using your water. I was using my own water the whole time because 50% of it was actually mine, even though we didn't know which one was which. Once I take it out, it's as if it's mine. What does this have to do with anything? Well, when each one fills up, they're actually taking their own water. So what? Well, Rashi says, "V'lo havisheni shoel al kosher rishon." If when it's my turn, I'm basically taking care of my own stuff. And you are taking care of your own stuff. It's not like I'm borrowing. When it's my turn, it's not like I'm borrowing yours and just taking, my share. It's not like if I'm a borrower, then I have to watch over your stuff. If not, then I don't have to. So now Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says it's not enough, right? Then basically they each have shared responsibility because I'm not a shoel. If I'm a shoel, if I'm like borrowing your stuff, because as if all of it is mine and yours together, then I'm just assuming responsibility for everything. Well, then I basically, right, if we have shared, basically, according to this, one second, each have, yesh brera, then basically there's your part and my part, and only once I pass you the deli, whatever it is, the cover, I passing on responsibility. Okay, just one second. Right. If they damage at that early point, since I take mine and you take yours and we're each shared owners entirely, it's not like I'm taking responsibility for the whole thing when it's my turn. Therefore, we're each shared owners. Unless I do an action to show I'm no longer taking responsibility by giving you that cover or possibly the delete. Rabbanan savre ain't brera. Rabbanan say, what are you talking about? It's all mixed up. There's no ownership of one over the other. So when it's your turn or my turn, I'm basically in charge of the whole thing and I have to watch over the whole thing for both of us. So therefore, but as soon as it's your turn, you become the shoel, you become responsible. So as soon as I say my turn is up, it's yours, your responsibility. And Amar Rabina, Azdu l'tamayu, by the way, they match what they say elsewhere. Okay, this is a different sugya about brera. So they say if we share property and then we say I'm not going to we each take an oath that we're not going to benefit from the other. So each one cannot go into the chatzir because we both share the chatzir. There is no brera. So that means I can't ever use this chatzir because this chatzir is owned by me and you, both of us, together. And there's no part that's really mine or yours separately. That's ein brera. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, I could use my half and say, retroactively, once I start using this, it's going to be clear that this was my half in the beginning. And it has nothing to do with you, and therefore I can use it because I'm not benefiting from you. And that just shows that he holds there's brera, which matches what he said earlier. What's the root of the machloket there? Exactly what we just said. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov savar yesh brera. Each one goes into their own place. Rabbanan hold ein brera. There is no brera. Last thing for today, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now, selling a board to your friend is like selling land because it's attached to the ground. When you sell land, you can sell it in three ways. Shtar, a document, chazaka, by doing some sort of action showing ownership, or kesef, passing money. You can't do it by passing an object. So now there's something strange because he says if you sell a board to your friend, now we're going back to this dalyo, the cover or the delete. As soon as you pass them over the pale, they acquired it. Very strange. You either need chazaka or kesef. This is a movable item you're just passing on. It's symbolic. Doesn't make any sense. So the answer la'olam b'chazaka. It really is a kinyan through chazaka, through acquiring it and doing something to show ownership. Well, what you do is when I pass over the board to you, let's say, I say, go do an action and acquire it. But if I passed you the deli, or again, whatever this is, or cover, it's as if I'm telling you, go and acquire it for yourself. And that's why it will be yours once you get this object. It's as if you're going to now acquire it through chazaka. You're actually going to have to go use it, but this is as if I said to you the words like chazek uknei by giving you the deli. Okay, so again, we saw more things about bor here. We don't have enough time to really review. It's a long daf and it's Erev Shabbat. So we're going to stop here and wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. And we'll continue with more issues about bor as we go on in the sugya. Have a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.